South African savings are said to have grown by just over 15% in 2021. These are the findings of the latest Allianz Global Wealth report. The growth is the fastest increase since the global financial crisis. The report puts the asset and debt situation of households in almost 60 countries under the microscope. Well, what did they find really in South Africa? For more on the figures and what contributed to these increases, I'm joined now by Dr. Andre Holzhausen, the head of insurance and wealth at Allianz. Good afternoon, sir. Welcome to today here on eNCA in Johannesburg. Thank you very much for your time. Just to run through us first the numbers. What have you found as far as the savings picture is concerned for South Africa?
Yeah, good afternoon, and thanks for having me here. Yeah, last year was a very good year for savers around the world, not only for South Africans, but also all the other savers in the global economy benefited nicely from the situation last year, because what we have seen, I mean, we talk about 2021, and this was still a very good year for equity markets in America, in Europe, but also in Africa, and that lifted the value of most assets we have in our portfolio. And the second reason for the strong development was clearly, it's a little bit counterintuitive, but it was the COVID-19 pandemic, and especially the reactions to the COVID-19 pandemic. Why? We have seen a lot of restrictions, we have seen lockdowns, and that curtailed the opportunities to spend money. We have seen less consumption. We were not allowed to go out, we were not allowed to travel around, and that led to a situation where more money was saved, more money was left in bank accounts, and that more or less also applies to South Africa. Here also these two growth drivers are important. One is the booming stock market, and the other, the increased savings that ended up, in the case of South Africa, also in insurance and pensions, which is still the most popular investment of savings vehicle in South Africa.
What about bank deposits?
Bank deposits also grow nicely, but only by 8%. This was a little bit below the long-term average. The long-term average is about 10%. So we can see that this is also similar trends that we also not only see in South Africa, but also in other countries, that during the lockdowns, during Corona, there was a new interest in new willingness to invest in capital markets, not only to take the most borrowing, the most safe savings, and this is bank deposits, but to play a little bit with the markets. Maybe we had more time in the lockdowns. Many people had access to e-brokers, to new brokers. It was very cheap also to trade on the exchange markets. This is a new trend we not only see in South Africa, but around the world, that especially also younger investors, younger savers, explore for themselves for the first time the equity markets, stock markets, and dare to invest more money in these investment vehicles than in the past.
Yeah, you're finding that the gross financial assets of South African households growing by 15.4% in 2021 from what and for the reasons you've explained. But I understand you've also found that South African households' net wealth has also grown by 18.1%. I'm just after the COVID-19 pandemic and with inflation having gone up, I just wondered, if there was no erosion of anything at all.
No, I mean, we talk here about the last year, and last year was still also in terms of the development of liabilities, still moderate developments, increase of 6%, around 6%. So this is more or less in line with the long-term average. This year is different. Clearly, this year is different. We see now the onset of inflation. We see the energy price crisis. We see a much more difficult economic environment. We expect that the global economy is about to enter recession, and that will for sure mean that there is less leeway to save. People need the money to pay their bills, to make ends meet, and there will be also an increase in debt and liabilities, because many people are forced more or less because of the loss of income, of rise in unemployment, to take out more loans to pay for the daily bills, and that makes a little bit more, not a little bit, a much more complicated situation than we have experienced last year. It's really very quickly that we see this deterioration in the economic outlook. This has happened never before, and also here the reason is very clear, because we have this terrible war in Europe, the terrible war in Ukraine, that has curtailed, and this has ended the economic recovery after the pandemic, and now we are about to enter a recession.
Yeah, but I mean, you also highlight in the report that although wealth growth in South Africa for 2021 remains relatively robust, there is a drop. There's a huge drop of bitterness because we are the most unequal society in the world.
Yes, this is unfortunate. I mean, overall, if you look just at the aggregate numbers, average numbers, South Africa is relatively rich land. I mean, even if you compare you with Brazil, with Russia, with India, there's more financial wealth in South Africa than in the other big emerging economies. But, and this is a big but, the distribution is really very unequal. And we have seen only a little improvement over the last couple of years. I mean, there's still that the 10% richest households have more than 85% of all financial assets in their hands. So this is a concentration we even not see in the US, and I have to say, US, North America is also a very unequal place. Some Latin American places are also very unequal. And we have seen only a slight increase of 1 to 2 percentage points. That the concentration of wealth has dropped by this little amount. And this is clearly not enough, because if you look back, the last years were not too bad. We have seen growth. We have seen relatively robust labor market. So this was a time, not only South Africa, but we see the same development in other places as well, that even if the economy is doing a decent job, inequality is increasing, inequality is on the rise. And this is something that is really worrying, really concerning, because now we enter a recession, and probably or very likely things will not change for the better, but for the opposite, for the worse.
Yeah, it's remarkable. The top 10% of the wealth pyramid in South Africa owns 85% of all net financial assets. I mean, nowhere else in the world is it like that. And that just underscores how unequal South Africa has become. Thank you very much for your time, Anne Holzhausen, the head of insurance and wealth at Allianz. We're just talking about the release of the Allianz Global Wealth report, showing that South African savings grew by 15.4% in 2021. But there are pressures, of course. Our economy is not doing well, high unemployment, and there's a high concentration of the wealth in a few people.